It is now time for the best part of each and every single week of the North to South Show, the weekly picks, and we are going week 2 this week. But before we get into the picks for week 2, we obviously got to get into the picks of week 1 and what happened here in this week. Obviously, we only picked 13 games because we no longer pick the South Carolina Gamecocks. I went through that in the last video. Don't want to touch on it too much, but out of the 13 games that I picked last week, my initial record, my starting out record for week 1, we have 11-2. 11-2. I won 11 games and lost 2. And honestly, one of the ones that I lost, Vanderbilt, East Tennessee State, that one I'm not too mad about because how the heck was I supposed to predict that one? I know nothing about East Tennessee State, and now I know that Vanderbilt's just trash in general. So that was a game that I don't really care that I lost. But the LSU-UCLA one was one that I was really going back and forth at it all week long, deciding who I was going to take. And I went for the easy pick. I went LSU because I was like, oh, this team's got more talent than UCLA. This team, I feel like, is going to have a bounce back year and all that stuff, even though I'd seen the signs from UCLA that they were going to come out and have an amazing game, watching them in week 0. And I don't know why I picked LSU. Obviously, I do know, and there's no excuse for me to say, like, oh, I should have picked UCLA in hindsight, because obviously it's easy to say that now. I thought LSU was going to win, and they didn't, but it was really tough for me coming down to the wire in the last couple days of that week, or before I did my picks. I was debating about taking UCLA, but I obviously didn't. So let's get into week 2. First, I'll give you guys a little rundown of the schedule. The schedule that we got Alabama State, Auburn, South Carolina, East Carolina, Pittsburgh, Tennessee, Florida, South Florida, UAB, Georgia, Texas A&M, Colorado, Mercer, Alabama, Texas, Arkansas, NC State, Mississippi State. We got the first SEC game of the season, Missouri, Kentucky. We got Austin Peay and Ole Miss. We got McNeese State and LSU, and we got Vanderbilt and Colorado State. So we will start off with the first game starting off at 12 o'clock on SEC Network. We have Alabama State versus Auburn. Now, Auburn, this is an easy pick. I'm not even going to hold you guys over because I'm taking Auburn in this game. This is a game that Auburn should win. And if you watched Auburn last week, very successful game. First of all, Bo Nix had 275 yards passing in that game. You had Tank Bigsby running for 119 yards. Auburn looked very well offensively and defensively yet last week against Akron. Now, again, you're going to say, well, it's just Akron. What else did you want Auburn to do in that game? They went up against a pretty crappy opponent, if that's what you want to call it, and they took care of business. They did all that they could in that game. They did everything right in that game. So I think Auburn had a very successful week 1, and I think that translates over to week 2 when you play Alabama State. You're really preparing up for that Penn State game, which I'm pretty sure comes up in week 3. I could be wrong. That's either week 3 or week 4. I'm almost guaranteed that is next week. You're preparing for that game, but this is a game that, again, Auburn, work out any flaws in your offense and your defense and everything like that, and I think Auburn wins this game easily. Like, there's no questions about it. Going on to 12 o'clock on ESPN, we got Pitt and Tennessee. This is a very interesting one. This is one that you're definitely going to want to, if you want a ball game, if you want a good ball game, turn this one on, because this one is not a game that you look at the schedule and everything like that and you're not like, I'm going to wake up early on Saturday to go watch Pitt and Tennessee. You're not going to do that. But if you wake up at about 1 o'clock or something like that, depending on what time you guys wake up, I don't know. But if it's just your lazy Saturday or something like that, you look at the 12 o'clock schedule and you're like, there are no really big games to have on except Oregon, Ohio State. But if you're going to watch that game, have the Pitt-Tennessee one open on the side, because I think this is going to be a great game. I've already done my early pick on this a long time back. I took Tennessee in this game. Now, I did say that feelings can change about any given game that I do those early picks for. Obviously, that's how I felt about it then. How I feel about it now can be completely different, because I watched Pitt go out this weekend, and they had a great game against UMass. They won 51-7 in that game against UMass. They played at home. I think Kenny Pickett had an amazing game for them. Even rushing the ball, they were decent, but really in the passing game, I think Pitt had an amazing game against a lesser opponent. But again, just like how I talked about Auburn, they took care of business. They did what they had to do. Now, Tennessee, on the other hand, they went up against Bowling Green last week, and the first half really scared me for Tennessee, for me to be confident in to go out and stick with my pick that I did earlier and take Tennessee. The first half that Tennessee had against Bowling Green was really scary. I think Joe Milton played a decent game. Obviously, they had a great second half. They shut out Bowling Green, and they scored a ton more points. But if you look at what Pitt was able to do last week, this is a team that's going to go out and they're going to start out scoring and firing and stuff like that. And we didn't get that from Tennessee last week, and that was against Bowling Green. I tell you, Pitt is no Bowling Green. So my senses are kind of leading towards changing my pick, and I am going to go with the Pitt Panthers in this game. Yes, I picked Tennessee in my early pick, and for all I know, Tennessee could still win this game. I still think it's going to be a really, really, really close ball game, and it's going to come down to the fourth quarter. But I just feel like with Pitt and how they came out this week, or week one, and how Tennessee came out and how Tennessee was looking even defensively, because yes, Tennessee only held Bowling Green to 6 points. But if you watch that game, Bowling Green missed some really, really big opportunities in that game. Bowling Green wasn't any flourished offense by any means, and they were still able to put up and get into the red zone and get into Tennessee territory quite a bunch of times in that first half of the Tennessee game. So I'm going to take Pitt in this one, but I think it's going to be a close game. So change my pick. I can do that because, again, my early pick videos, they're early picks, and they can change based on how I feel about seeing these teams act in actual action. So I'm going with the Pitt Panthers in this one. 1 o'clock on ABC, we got Florida against South Florida. Florida had a great game against FAU. Obviously, there's going to be lots of talk around Emory Jones and then Richardson, obviously Anthony Richardson. Who's going to be the quarterback? Who do you want on the field for Florida? There's going to be so much talk about that. This is a game that Florida should win. This is a game that Florida is going to have to win to go into that week 3. You're going to have a very convincing performance here to have that confidence to go back home into the swamp to take on the Alabama Crimson Tide in week 3 that is coming up next week. So Florida is going to take care of business in this game. I have no questions about that. I'm taking Florida, but this is a game where you're going to want to get your quarterback situation solved out. This is a game where you really want to get it going on the ground. Obviously, you had Richardson rush for 160 yards last week, which was obviously unbelievable, but you're going to want to get a lot of things going in this game and really just have a clean game defensively. You are playing an away game here. This game is being played in Tampa Bay, Raymond James Stadium, because that is South Florida's home. But still, it's a game that Florida definitely should win. Should win 110%. Give me the Florida Gators in this one. 3:30 on ESPN2, we have UAB versus the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia had one of the best defensive performances that we have seen in college football in many, many years against Clemson last week. And them going up against UAB, this should be a win for them. They're going back to Sanford Stadium. I guarantee you this place will be rocking, not necessarily because this is a big-time game, but because of the big-time performance that they had last week. The energy is going to be high in Sanford Stadium this Saturday, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. UAB, honestly, if we're talking about a CUSA team, they're not half bad. Like, don't expect this to just be a game that Georgia absolutely rolls over UAB and UAB just gets shut out and Georgia goes up and puts like 70 points up on them. Expect UAB to put some points up. It might not be a lot. It might just be 7 points, but I do not think this UAB team gets shut out, especially with all the COVID that's going on with Georgia right now. Again, they've had a couple players go down with COVID. They're going to be missing some pieces. Now, that's not me saying that Georgia should be threatened in this game. Georgia's going to win this game easily, but I think UAB puts up, honestly, I feel like UAB might put up more than Clemson. Take with that what you will, but I think UAB is going to put up a decent fight in the beginning. Not saying that they're going to be anywhere close to Georgia, but I think UAB maybe does something interesting in this game. Next up at 3:30 on Fox, we got Texas A&M versus Colorado. This is going to be played at a neutral site because they are playing at the Denver Broncos Stadium, but obviously is still in Colorado. This is a game Texas A&M should win. Now, you travel into a new altitude, which is going to be interesting because we know it's not easy to travel mile high. They're playing at Mile High Stadium. It's not going to be easy to do that, especially when you're used to playing down in Texas. It's a bit of an altitude change, so that is going to be interesting, but I don't think that's an excuse for any reason why Texas A&M should lose this game. You look at Haynes King, he threw for almost 300 yards in his first game. You had A-Chain rushing for over 100 yards, and you had Aniyah Smith catching for over 100 yards in this game against Kent State. They took care of Kent State, no questions about it. They had a really, really good week 1 performance. Now, you are playing a Power 5 opponent here in Colorado, but there's nothing that Colorado has that should be new for Texas A&M. There's nothing that Colorado has that should surprise Texas A&M. Texas A&M should go into Mile High Stadium and take care of business, even though it could be maybe Colorado makes it interesting for the first quarter or two, but I think Texas A&M pulls away by the third quarter 110%. Give me the Texas A&M Aggies. Alabama versus Mercer. Like, this is the one I don't even got to explain. I'm taking Alabama in this one. Alabama's the best team in the nation. They got the best defense in the nation. Their offense is looking like at least a top 2 offense in the nation. You could argue that they got the number 1 offense and defense on both sides of the ball. Alabama's the best team in the nation. And you go up against an FCS opponent like Mercer, there's no questions about it that Alabama's going to win this game. I got Notre Dame in my mind. I don't need to spend any more time talking about that one. Give me Alabama over Mercer. 7 o'clock on ESPN. This is perhaps the most interesting game of the whole week 2 in the SEC. We got Texas traveling to Arkansas in Fayetteville for a very interesting game. Now, Arkansas, for a team that I came out this season, and I have talked so highly on Arkansas, and Arkansas has kind of been my sleeper pick this year to be better than teams like Auburn, to be better than teams like Mississippi State. I have Arkansas making a bowl game. For them to go out and be tied with Rice a decent amount into that game, that scared me. That scared me a ton. Now, Arkansas was able to take care of business after in the second half and everything like that, as they did start to pull away, and they did obviously end up beating Rice, but it was not a confident performance or a comforting performance for me at all, for a guy who's back in Arkansas each and every single throughout the whole offseason. I've been back in Arkansas. Texas, on the other hand, very impressed what they were able to go out and do last week against Louisiana Lafayette, because this was a game, honestly, I was thinking about taking Louisiana Lafayette with the spread there. I think it was like -8 or something like that. I thought that they were going to play Texas way closer than they did, but Texas goes out. They take care of business against Louisiana Lafayette. I think they won 38-18. It was a very, very, very good performance for Texas and Steve Sarkisian in their first week. You had Hudson Card throwing for 224 yards there. You had Bijan Robinson rushing for over 100, and then you had Whittington receiving for over 100. They got weapons on this offense, and I think that that is no question about what's going to happen in this game too. You travel to Arkansas. The atmosphere is going to be amazing. Cannot wait to see. I'm not saying that this game is going to be a blowout by any stretch. It's going to be a close game at the beginning. Arkansas has a defense. I do think Arkansas, and I do believe that Arkansas has a defense, and they got some guys to compete with the guys that Texas has. But seeing what Texas was able to do last week, now Texas is going to be going on the road in this game. We haven't seen Texas on the road yet. Seeing what Texas has put up last week and just the discomfort that Arkansas has left me with last week, I'm going to take Texas in this game. I took Texas in my early pick video, and I'm going to stick with Texas here because it was a very, very, very good first week for Texas, and I feel really, really strong about this team going into Arkansas and being able to win. I'm not saying that they're going to slap them, but I think that Texas does go into Fayetteville and does come out with a win in this one. Arkansas will put up a battle early, but Texas will pull away in the third and fourth quarter. 7 o'clock on ESPN2. Another very interesting one. We got North Carolina State versus Mississippi State. Now, Mississippi State had the closest game out of anyone in the SEC because they only won 35-34 against Louisiana Tech in week 1. Now, North Carolina State went out and they beat South Florida 45-0 in this game. From what Mississippi State showed me last week, how do I go out and not take North Carolina State, who had a very, very comfortable win? Now, yes, this game is in Starkville. The home field advantage is going to help, but North Carolina State has been a decent team. They were a decent team last year, and you go up and you play a very sound defensive game against South Florida last week, and you put up 45 points. I just don't see how I take Mississippi State in this game. I truly don't. So I'm taking North Carolina State in this one, even though Mississippi State and North Carolina State are both 1-0, and Mississippi State is going to be at home for this game. I'm taking North Carolina State. First SEC game of the season, 7:30 on SEC Network. We have Missouri versus Kentucky. This is one that's going to be beating my mind up, and I still honestly don't know to this point who I'm taking here. I think I know who I'm going to lean towards, but I honestly don't know who I'm going to take here yet, and that's what makes these videos great, because I go through it in my mind. I just speak to you guys what's going through my mind in my pick process to take who I want. Start off with Missouri, because Missouri had an interesting game against Central Michigan. They only won 34-24. Central Michigan put up a decent fight against them, but you look at the offense, I think the offense played a pretty decent game. You had Beatty obviously rushing for 200-plus yards, which the rushing game really was, I don't want to say a point of concern, but I think at least I expected the passing game to be the main source of yardage for Missouri for this season, 110%. And if you're going to be beat by Missouri, you're going to get beat by their passing game. it looks like the rushing game is here, and it is here to stay because Beatty had an amazing game, and I knew that he was going to be a real good running back this season in the SEC, but 200-plus yards a game, or starting out for his first game rushing for 200-plus yards, I did not call that. I did not call that whatsoever, so that was a big surprise there. Connor Bazelak, in his first game, threw for 257 yards. He threw for 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. I still think he's one of the more sound quarterbacks in the SEC, even though he is only a sophomore now, and he's only played one game in his sophomore season. But if we talk about Kentucky real quick, first of all, Missouri's defense giving up 24 points to Central Michigan. That's going to have to tighten up for sure to go up against Kentucky. But Kentucky also, very surprising performance, putting up 45 points against ULM and then scoring or only letting up 10 points to ULM. I think Levis had an amazing game. You look at his stats, 367 yards in that game. Really across the board. You look at the rushing game, Chris Rodriguez, who's obviously one of the better running backs in all the SEC, rushed for 125 yards. And you had Josh Ali receiving for 136 yards in that game. Kentucky looks like they should be the pick in this game. They have the game at home. Kentucky played a way more sound game than Missouri did last week. But I honestly am going to take Missouri in this game. I want to see what Kentucky is like going up against an SEC defense, and this isn't going to be a top-tier SEC defense, but it is going to be an SEC defense. I cannot wait to see how Missouri's defense performs against Kentucky. I think Missouri wins this game with offense. I think Missouri is going to go out and have a way more sound game offensively. And I know it sounds crazy because that wasn't the case for last week. Kentucky had an amazing game offensively, and Missouri had a shaky game, honestly. They only beat a team in Central Michigan who's a MAC team by 10 points, where you had Kentucky go out and beat their opponent, Louisiana Monroe, by 35 points. I have said that I think Missouri is the third best team in the SEC since the offseason, and that really comes down to this game because this is the deciding factor. This is the most underrated game in all the SEC for the whole season. Missouri-Kentucky, tune into it 7:30 on SEC Network. It's going to be an amazing game. I have Missouri by the slimmest of margins. This is going to come down to the final possession. I tell you that. Whoever wins this game is going to be set for the rest. I don't want to say set for the rest of the season, but they are going to have an amazing start. The loser is going to have some catching up to do. So Missouri, Kentucky, I am taking Missouri in this one, but it is going to be one of the most underrated games in the SEC all season. I can tell you that. Austin Peay, Ole Miss. We just talked about Ole Miss in the prior segment. I'm taking Ole Miss. They're going up against an FCS opponent. I don't need to go into this with too much detail, except for the fact that Ole Miss has 2 games to really tune up on defense. Obviously, I talked about how good they started out against Louisville, and overall how good of a performance that Ole Miss did have against Louisville. You got 2 games before that Alabama game to really tighten up that defense and work out any flaws that you got in that defense. So that is going to be what's going to be worked on here. Gets your second team guys some reps in this game, 110%. And the offense is going to be the offense. Bottom line, Ole Miss wins this game. LSU versus McNeese State. Wouldn't it be something if I took McNeese State in this game and just said, screw it, I'm sick of picking LSU because they always let me down. I'm not going to do that. LSU is going to win this game, but it's going to be a rebound game. It's going to be a game where you got to work on defense because defense was a huge reason why they lost to UCLA. They got rushed all over in that game. The secondary played decent, but I still think that they could tighten up a bit. McNeese State should be a win. They're an FCS opponent. LSU is going to win this game, but you got to work on a lot of things for LSU. There's a lot to be worked on for LSU in this game. And then finishing up with Vanderbilt and Colorado State. Colorado State. Vanderbilt last week. We know the story. They played terrible against East Tennessee State. Now, Colorado State didn't even win. These are 2 0-1 teams. Colorado State lost to South Dakota State, who South Dakota State, in all honesty, is one of the better teams in the FCS. So they played a decent opponent. I'm not here to trash on South Dakota State because they are actually a good football team compared to some of the lower FBS teams. I'm taking Colorado State in this game. Just seeing what I've seen from Vanderbilt, they haven't won a game in goodness knows how long, and this game is in Colorado State, and when you have any doubt about any game, you always take the home team, 110%. So this game is going to be played at 10 o'clock on CBS Sports Network. Does Vanderbilt start the season out? Does Clark Lee start his tenure out at Vanderbilt 2-0 or 0-2, sorry? I honestly think so. That's how bad Vanderbilt was last week. They put up 3 points against East Tennessee State. 3 points. Just can't have that. So